Hey, it's me, WWE Hall of Famer from the LOD, Road Warrior Animal. And who are you?
Yeah, I gotta do this when? Now? I'm watching a match. What is now? Now is, oh, now. Yeah, thanks. Hey, this is the Pharaoh from Monty and the Pharaoh. I just want to say thank you to our subscribers as we now have hit the 10,000 plateau. Thank you to all our subscribers out there. But I'm going to ask our subscribers to take the next step for us and become a full-fledged YouTube Monty and the Pharaoh member. Yes, that's right, folks. You can check it out. We've got 3 different levels. There's free shirts. There's free autographs. There's all sorts of perks for our members. There is nothing more we enjoy than giving you this program. And to do that, we need your support, and we appreciate your support. This is Jimmy Pharaoh, and don't forget to check out Monty and the Pharaoh every Thursday from Indie Music TV and on Cablevision here locally in New York. Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast, Monty and the Pharaoh. Later. Is that good enough for you? Can I finish this? Lesnar's killing him. I'm pissed.
All right, welcome back to Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast, Monty and the Pharaoh, only seen here out of Indie Music TV, out of Ronkonkoma, New York, usually on a Thursday show, but we have a special show today with wrestling icon Jewel Strongbow. But before that, the Pharaoh and I decided to do an extra show out there for the fans where we're going to discuss the history of the WWE Tag Team titles. So, at the board is Matty Ice, who we dragged out of the beautiful sunshine in New York, which we haven't had recently. And you went paintballing today, brother?
Unfortunately not. Since it rained yesterday, it was too muddy to go paintballing this morning.
Ah.
So we just went bowling.
Isn't that oh, so you went bowling?
Yeah.
How do you bowl? Are you a good bowler?
Yeah, I'm a straight bowler.
Like what?
I get like 140.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
What does a straight bowler mean? You don't get crocked when you bowl?
Yeah, no, you know when people like fucking like twist their balls?
Yeah,
and
so he's like
a
straight bowler.
I just chuck it straight.
You just throw.
Yeah.
No science involved.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Just throw it on the side.
And for our upcoming show in a couple of weeks, Chris Multier sent us his 2 books, The Job Man. So me and Jimmy have some reading to do. So we want to talk about that next Thursday. But anyway, to the right is the start of the show, Mr. Jimmy Pharaoh. Jimmy, how are you, bud?
Good morning. It's not Thursday, but we are here.
And yeah, did you get some rest today at least?
Yeah,
a little bit. Gonna get your drink on tonight?
Yeah, I probably should have gotten my drink on before I got here, but yeah, yeah, probably.
So last Thursday we were up against the Dark Side of the Ring. I haven't seen it yet, but the Grizzly Smith interview.
Okay.
Not interview, but the Grizzly Smith show. So if anyone doesn't know who Grizzly Smith was, he was a wrestler back in the 60s and early 70s.
Yeah, back in the day.
Who later became a booker for the WWE and some other wrestling federations.
Right.
Also well known as he's the father of Jake the Snake Roberts.
Mm-hmm.
Rockin' Robin, thank you.
Right.
And
so there a fella out in
what's
Texas,
his name?
that Houston guy?
Sam Houston.
There you go.
Mr. I Need a Sandwich. So from what I understand is this is pretty telling about the sexual abuse that Mr. Smith had put on his family.
Okay.
But we're not really going to talk about that today.
Yeah, I'm not exactly running to hear about that one, but I could see why people would.
But we do want to celebrate our friend... well, not really, but our friend and yours, rock and roll Buck Zumhofe, is now spending his
Better reword that.
seventh year in jail.
Yeah.
Buck Zumhofe, rock and roll Zumhofe, was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He's now, I think, almost 67 years old. Where unfortunately,
he's going to expire in there.
Hannibal on his channel reported that he was sentenced just recently, but didn't realize it was from 2014.
Right.
But anyway, Buck Zumhofe, the reason I bring it up is coming off that Dark Side of the Ring was another racist, not racist, but a child abuser.
He's a molester.
What do you remember of rock and roll Buck Zumhofe?
I remember the radio that he had. He carried the Walkman like we used to carry back in high school. That's what I remember about the guy. We didn't get to see much of him. He was AWA, wasn't he?
Yep.
You know, like, wasn't he? I think he might have competed at Wrestle Rock. I might have seen him on like the...
He was in the WWE for a cup of coffee.
Was he there for a cup of coffee? It must have been a cold cup of coffee. I don't really remember much.
Well, I'll tell you what... Rotten hell.
Yeah, what a
rock and roll Buck Zumhofe.
Yeah, what a scumbag, man. Sorry, you know, who's judging? This speaks for itself.
I would like to thank the band Wisteria Hall, who sings the theme song for the Monty and the Pharaoh show. Wisteria Hall is led by Jimmy Farrow, along with his partner Bart Griggs. Wisteria Hall sings such great songs as In My Dream, This Life, Not Far Behind, and Here Comes the Rain. Get their music on Spotify and iTunes and Reverb Nation. We were just talking about your band today, Jimmy, and how I feel it's one incredible band.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We put a lot of work into those tunes.
You know, it's funny in today's society. It's like sometimes some real gold slips through the cracks. It's a little bit disappointing.
Hey, well, you know, growing up, I used to watch the Uncle Floyd show on UHF, and I thought he was wonderful and special, and I remember you scratching your head a little bit like, what are you watching?
This is true.
And then he wound up on NBC, so there was something there in those
Let's not forget, he had a little band that was coming up from New Jersey that no one knew on his show. I do remember that episode.
Bon Jovi?
Bon Jovi.
Yeah, he also had David Bowie and John Lennon were huge fans of his too, by the way, and said so back in the day.
Did they go on a show?
Oh, the Ramones did.
Well,
before anybody knew who the Ramones were.
There you go.
Blue Oyster Cult did.
There you
before
go.
Anybody who knew
big names.
Well, actually, Blue Oyster Cult was big time in the 70s, so I can't say that. They rule. I love Blue Oyster Cult.
All right, well, if you didn't know it, you are watching Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast, Monty and the Pharaoh, only seen here out of Indie Music TV. Catch Monty and the Pharaoh on the Monty and the Pharaoh YouTube page and Monty and the Pharaoh Facebook Live page. Hear us on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Anchor, and catch us on Twitch TV, the Monty and the Pharaoh page. And if you live in New York, you could catch us on New York Cable on Channel 15 every Tuesday from 7 to 7:30, and for early risers, 6 a.m. to 6:30, and on Channel 20 on Friday, 2 a.m. to 2:30. We'll be right back after this commercial break with the history of the WWF, WWF, and WWE Tag Team titles.
Tag, you're it. See you in a sec. The Monty and the Pharaoh Show is brought to you by...
Because wine is your second favorite four-letter word. California wine, New York attitude. Good fucking wine.
Yeah.
You want to star in your own success? Call QuickCast, www.quickcast.com, 866-7-CAST-NOW. That's 866-7-CAST-NOW. QuickCast.
Start your own success. Oh, what's up, Mike?
Hey, Jimmy, what's going on?
Yeah, nothing much.
You know, Jimmy, I love this country.
Oh.
I love to buy Made in America material. And I love to buy my artwork at TAG, T-A-A-G, Made in America, 14 East Broadway, Port Jefferson, New York, 11717. The shop at the corner. All right, welcome back to Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast, Monty and the Pharaoh, only seen here out of Indie Music TV. And today's special Saturday show is about the history of the WWE Tag Team titles, WWF Tag Team titles, WWF Tag Team titles. We're saying it's all the same. We did have a show a couple of months ago, the history of the Intercontinental title, which was a fantastic show.
That was a blast.
This one seemed to be a little more difficult.
Yeah, it was. Folks, this title was created technically on June 3rd, 1971. So, of course, we are now celebrating 50 years of this belt. It has undergone a billion title changes. I think what made it harder for us is that the fact that the tag team belts, you think other belts get passed around like hotcakes? The tag team titles get passed around even more than any other belt as far as the total amount of champions and the total count and what we had to decipher through to figure out where we were going to go with all of this. Don't quote me, but you know what? And I'm not looking at a computer. I just throwing it off the top of my head. I think the very first champions were Tarzan Tyler and Luke Graham. I
think,
could be wrong.
No, I think you hit it on the head.
But I think I'm close. You know,
Yep.
I remember for some reason those two, their names stuck out years back when I looked at this list. I haven't looked at the list in 1,000 years, but I believe that they might have been the first champions. Tag team wrestling, as I said, evolved over the years. It became much more hotcake situation in the Attitude Era, as we'll get to a little bit later.
Absolutely.
But, Mike, over the years, there's been some pretty amazing tag team specialists of sorts. You gotta.
Before we go to what we feel are the history a little bit, I want to give some recognition.
Yeah.
Mr. Fuji held the tag team titles 5 times.
Right.
For a total of 932 days.
Mr. Fuji, to me, is the probably early pioneer, along with another team we'll get to, and I don't want to start giving everything away, but he was a rock for tag team wrestling in the WWF and then the WWF in the 70s and into the mid-80s. Mr. Fuji was amazing. Who's next?
You've got Billy Gunn holding the title 10 times for 916 days.
Yeah.
Now, we got to understand something,
Yeah.
right? The 70s, 80s, 90s,
Right.
2000s, and beyond, the game changed. We had the same problem with the Intercontinental title,
Sure,
right?
the game changed.
Guys
sure.
held it for a longer time, which
Right.
I enjoyed much better,
Right.
actually.
Right.
So things do get skewed.
I'll tell you, though, it is comforting to see an old-school legend like Mr. Fuji. Sure, it spells out that he had 5 reigns in 932 days, and it spells out the way tag team belts would change all the time in the Attitude Era. To comparing Fuji's 5 reigns, 932, to Billy Gunn's 10 reigns, I am relieved to see that Billy Gunn had 916 days.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that.
And again, both
you know,
superior tag team specialists within the WWF
absolutely.
are E, right?
Who do we have at 3 and 4? I think we could pair these up for Matty
You've got
to throw up there.
Axe and Smash.
There you go. Good
They've
old
held the belt
Demolition.
3 times for 398
Actually,
days.
698
698 days, yeah.
You got to throw the other 300 days on there. You know, or is it 350 days? No,
that's terrible.
300's better. Okay.
And then after that, you've got Tony Gurria.
How about Johnny Valiant? We skipped Johnny Valiant.
Oh, you got John. Well, I purposely skipped Johnny Valiant.
yeah,
2
well,
times for 600
What's your
days.
problem with Johnny Valiant? You thought he was a girl the first time you looked at him.
Well, we'll get into that, but
Yeah.
that's I'm
There
just
you
not
go.
a big fan.
Yeah.
Not a
Tony-
big fan of him or his friends.
Tony, oh my God. Oh boy, you're like school on Christmas vacation. Now class. All right, Tony Gurria, how about that? We got that one up there. Tony Gurria.
So Tony Gurria,
You know.
very important for me, right? Because
Sure,
that's
for
when
me
I first
too.
started getting into wrestling.
Sure.
Tony Gurria, Rick Martel, big deal.
I remember him
right?
with Zbyszko being champions, world champions.
So, I mean, look, man, the list goes on and on and on, but I think it's important if we're going to discuss the history of the WWE tag team titles,
Right.
we should start off in the 70s, Jimmy. Go ahead.
All right. Well, during the 1970s, you can really look at 2 specific teams, in my opinion. Professor Toro Tanaka and Mr. Fuji, who held the belts, I think, 3 times over that time period during the 70s, and it was spaced out over several years. And you've got the Valiants. And the Valiants, to me, were pre-Freebird, if you will.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? They were a sexy name. They were like something I heard other people, like adults, talking about. When they would talk about wrestling, I would hear about the Valiants. So the Valiants clearly had an it factor going on back then. I'm sure there's other teams that we could mention during the 70s. You know, like in the later 70s, Tony Gurria started to become
Tanaka and
you know,
Fuji.
well, as I already said, Tanaka and Fuji carried the 70s along with the Valiants. You know, so
Jimmy, Jimmy takes this really seriously, as I do, and we had a discussion, and there was a point where we were talking about the Freebirds, who obviously were in the WWE for a very small cup of coffee.
Right. Otherwise, they would have been put in consideration if they had done something. But to me,
we talked about factions.
Right. To me,
so
they were a
the
faction.
question was,
right.
You'll see that the Valiants will be on Jimmy and my top 10 greatest
Spoiler alert?
Well,
What are you doing?
you know, that's
Oh boy.
you know.
Oh my God.
But the issue we had with it is Jimmy, as we were talking about the Freebirds, didn't feel, and say differently, is you didn't feel a faction deserved to be recognized as a tag team.
Unless they're forced into the equation, like Vince putting a strap on a situation like that and having them hold the title for multiple times and long times. You know, that's. But we'll get to that situation later too.
I mean, here was the
Freebirds, like you said, had a cup of coffee with Vince, so they're not in consideration here. Again, if they had been given multiple reigns with Vince and had a long historic title reign or whatever, then I have to be forced because that's what Vince, he forced it in.
Here were one of the great things about the 70s, though. The wrestler that was not, a high-level wrestler, like a mid-carder.
Yeah.
In some cases, WWE would always put a tag team title
Dominic
on.
Dominic had a great time during
right?
the 70s. Baron Mikel Cicluna
Baron Mikel Cicluna.
The WWF
Absolutely.
WWF tag team title.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, that made the 70s and 80s wrestling a little more special.
We should give
to
an
me.
honorable mention to the Executioners during the 70s.
Absolutely. By the way, I saw real quick. I guess Russell put. I want to make sure. Russell Campbell says, "How could we look over the LOD, Rock and Roll Express, so on?" Got to always remember, guys. Some of we're talking about the WWE.
Right. We're not doing WCW.
I'm looking for a comment.
We will someday,
I'm
but
looking.
We're not doing NWA, WCW, AWA.
Right.
You could start mentioning the High Flyers.
Absolutely.
We're doing the WWFE title, which was created in '71, and they're celebrating the 50th anniversary.
Absolutely.
Of it. That's why we're doing this. So it's
another thing. No, this is again.
Well, actually, that's not why.
Thank you. Do
was
not
our
say
idea
that.
First,
That's
and then
right.
Everybody else jumped on
this
it. That
is part
true.
of the Monty and the Pharaoh setup.
True.
So that is totally
so
true.
This was in the works for
and all of a sudden
weeks.
the WWE. But I want to run this by you before we continue on.
Yeah.
Russell Campbell puts Meltzer had the gall to say the Young Bucks, Jericho and Sammy Guevara are the best two tag teams of all time. Could you believe if that's true, Russell? I want to throw up in my mouth.
Listen, Meltzer. You know what? You know who gives people. You know what gives Meltzer power? People who listen to him. He has no power over me. His opinions mean nothing to me. Next. That's how I feel about Meltzer. Give me some seltzer. Oy. Please. Give me a break. Give me a break. You know?
And Russell says he wasn't talking about the WWE. He was talking about what Dave Meltzer wrote. I appreciate that.
Yeah, okay.
Because
That's
I got to
cool.
tell you, Dave Meltzer's an asshole. I mean, if you just want to get pops, you're crazy.
He's just so filled with
so,
bias.
if I was to ask you, Jimmy, in your mind of the 70s, give me three of the teams that influenced 70s
Tanaka
WWE
and Fuji, not in this,
champion.
the Valiants first, Tanaka and Fuji. I think of the Executioners for some reason.
There's nothing wrong with that.
That's who I think of. But, I'm sure that there's other teams. Someone's jumping up and down, Haystacks Calhoun and Tony Gurria. Tony Gurria and Larry Zabisco.
You're right.
So, Irish Pat Barrett with Dominic DeNucci.
I think you're right. I think I can't really argue with those three teams at all.
Those are the ones I remember the most.
I mean, if you want to throw the Blackjacks in there.
Okay.
All right, but you know what? Definitely Valiants,
I think the
Fuji, and
Executioners,
Tanaka.
especially who was under those masks.
Absolutely, very cool
We're
in the
talking
end.
about Studd and Kowalski, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to go with them.
Let's talk about the 80s.
Yeah.
80s tag team wrestling. I think that's when maybe tag team wrestling came into its own.
Yeah. It's definitely when it joined the big time show. For sure. In the first half of the 80s, it was the warm-up to the big-time show. And yes, I'm alluding to WrestleMania and all that followed after WrestleMania.
Sure.
But the teams, to me, that carried the first half of the decade are, here's Mr. Fuji again with Mr. Saito.
Right.
Absolutely. Remember that time they won the belts and held on to it forever?
I want to give a pop to C.J. Duncan, mention Tito Santana, Ivan
Absolutely.
Paduski.
Ivan, I'm not going to lose Paduski.
There you go.
Yep, sure, I remember them. You remember the whole deal with that? Tito got to be pre-Ricky Morton. He'd get beat up.
Apps and Putski clean the house.
And then Putski come in and kill everybody.
That's
there you
right.
go. Well, in the early '80s, it's Fuji and Saito. Also, can we please mention Captain Lou Albano? Please.
Absolutely.
We're talking tag teams here. Captain Lou Albano, the manager of champions, the manager of tag team champions. Oh, my God. He had 1 million tag team champions. Every time there was a heel with Albano, you knew they were going to get that belt. And they all deserved it, by the way, in that time period. You know. Samoans. My God. The Samoans... I mean, do I have to explain this? You know the bloodline, you know the family line, and what their seed has carried all these decades. The Samoans were absolutely the best, right there with I think they were better than Fuji and Saito personally. But we're talking two great villain tag teams. My God,
I waver towards Fuji and Saito.
I get it,
but
they're
Samoans
more
were great.
But the Samoans were just
Absolutely.
wow, what a great gimmick. I mean, Fuji and Saito also were great. They're both amazing, Can we? I guess you could mention the Moondogs.
That's like, don't pass the Moondogs. Do not pass
mention the great face tag team of the early '80s with Guerrero and Mortel.
Oh, absolutely.
Guerrero and Mortel were as face as they come. The fans loved them. The girls howled. They could both wrestle. In those days, they were considered absolutely great wrestlers, for what they did. They were fantastic. Rick Martel was a star.
Just a little shout-out for Putski and Santana. They held the title for 173
yes,
days.
Did.
That's
they
a
lost
long
it to the Samoans,
time.
I think at the Spectrum.
They did. They lost it at the Philadelphia Spectrum at a house
show.
show.
I'm on fire right now.
And, let's not get a shout-out. Let's give a shout-out to the WWE at that time, at the Shea Stadium show, right?
Sure.
They put...
The Samoans
Bob
Backlund
and Morales. And Backlund and Morales win the tag team titles.
I was very excited when Backlund and Morales won the belts. The thought of people holding belts simultaneously, being multiple champions, that fascinated me. I thought that was great. And of course, they took the belts right off them.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Like, you guys can't be tag champs. You got belts.
And they gave it right back to Samoans.
And the Samoans wound up getting it back, and the fans were pissed. And you know who they beat? Oh, my God. I think they beat in the finals, and I don't even know how they got there. Oh, my God. I think it was Rene Goulet and I think Dominic DeNucci.
Could be.
Oh, my Lord.
Fans, please check that. That'd be fantastic.
It could be, but these are ancient memories. Bear with me, folks. It's 40 years, but I pretty much remember these things. Yeah, tag team wrestling was wonderful in the mid '80s, but then.
Well, I want to then talk about really important. I don't, going to take a break after the '80s, but a couple of things.
Yeah.
Jules is coming in. Chief Jules Strongbow
Absolutely,
is coming in. The Strongbow's big part of the '80s.
There's no doubt about that. I was saving that for Jules. No disrespect, but
absolutely.
As a matter of fact, last night I watched them beat the Samoans. So that was absolutely tremendous. The Strongbows were way over. Did you hear that screaming from the fans?
Oh, absolutely.
When they won the belts?
Absolutely.
How'd you like that quick pin, too? That was great.
And, look, the 80s gets, look, there's other teams.
There is.
North-South connection, Adonis and Murdoch.
Johnny Rods and Jose Estrada.
Absolutely.
Who we saw get a tag team title shot at the Garden versus Fuji and Saito. We saw that.
U.S. Express.
Of course.
Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov.
Of course.
But the Dream Team, one of my favorites.
Oh, please, of course.
Guys, we're going into 10 teams. It was so hard for me to bypass some of these teams.
We're dealing with 50 years.
But before the break,
try to get to the best 10.
I will say this: they didn't make our top 10.
Okay.
But I would say probably the most, to me, I don't care, 81 to 89.
Yeah.
The most important tag team match in the history of tag team wrestling. The Soul Patrol, Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas defeating the Wild Samoans.
That was
not just incredible for wrestling.
Yeah, that's one of the greatest tag team moments of the decade for WWF, period.
Absolutely.
Period.
And in all of pro wrestling.
Of course it was. And it was great.
And, I actually mentioned to the Pharaoh that I thought maybe Atlas and
might get a sniff of the 10 greatest teams.
Might get a sniff, but then Pharaoh said...
Stop giving everything away.
All right.
Maybe they made it, maybe they didn't. Stay tuned, folks.
All right, we'll be back.
Did we get you?
After this commercial break with the greatest top 10 WWE, WWF, WWF Tag Team Champions.
M&J Video Games and Collectibles. Sport and non-sport cards, wrestling items, autographed items. We buy, sell, and trade. M&J Video Games and Collectibles, located at 1049 Queen Street, Southington, Connecticut. Call us at 1-860-479-9223 or 860-93-GAMES. M&J, video games and collectibles. And Nitro's Garage for all your automotive needs. Call 646-675-2349. That's 646-675-2349. For all your automotive needs, Nitro's Garage. Ask for Jack.
Jimmy, I gotta take a dump. What? No, I mean I need a dumpster.
Well, for all those needs, you need to call Big V Dumpster Rental, Long Island, New York, 631-900-DUMP.
All right, welcome back to Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast. Monty the Pharaoh, only seen here out of Indie Music TV. So, as we discussed in the 70s, Pharaoh talked about the top 3 teams he thought were in the 70s. What are your top 3 teams of the 80s?
Wow. Well, we didn't get to the other half of the 80s, which is, the WrestleMania situation. And this is where tag team wrestling really takes off. You had Demolition and the Hart Foundation and the Rockers and, other teams came through too. The Brainbusters, you had all these great teams. But to me, I guess I would say that the 3 best teams of the 80s that best defined and dominated it, you have to go with the Samoans. You got to go with Demolition, in my opinion. And the third one becomes tough for me. Oh boy, that is tough. I'm going to say Hart Foundation. Okay, I'll go with that.
I want to recognize a couple again. U.S. Express, Rotundo,
Absolutely,
right?
My
Wyndham.
God, wasn't that Sheik and Volkov with them? I mean, come on.
Let's not forget about the Colossal Connection, dude. That was a
Okay.
pretty wicked. Like we talk about super
Sure,
teams, right?
sure.
That was like a super
Sure,
team.
yeah.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Brainbusters, who I thought fell flat in the WWF
Right, but they were still
at the
great.
time.
I thought they were great.
Well, you thought they were great because of the NWA. You
Yeah, that's
didn't
true,
think they
too.
were great because
Yeah,
of WWF.
that's definitely more so than
The Nasty Boys,
the Nasty Boys are freaking
LOD.
Fantastic. LOD, of course, but they fall into the Brainbusters thing with
They
me.
fell
But
flat, right?
We'll explain that more when we get to the top 10 list, I guess.
Money Inc.,
Money Inc., they really are truly one of the greatest teams in the history of the
Strike
company.
Force,
Strike Force is probably in the top 20 all-time of the greatest teams in the history of the company.
Natural Disasters.
Of course. Of course.
Here's an interesting thing, Pharaoh. I kind of forgot this, but like
What do you got?
Money Inc. Defeats Legion of Doom, right?
Right.
But they lose it to the Natural Disasters. Were the Natural Disasters faces? I don't remember them
Yeah.
being faces.
Yeah. Yeah,
they were.
Yeah, they were.
Wow.
Yeah, they were. Fans got on their side. Those big, chubby, lovable guys.
Wow.
Yeah, they were over.
That's surprising.
Yeah, well,
Very
sometimes you can
surprising.
do that stuff. They were lovable, just like Otis. He's lovable.
Well, he is
Don't you
lovable.
still love Otis? They didn't
Absolutely.
release Otis, did they?
No, they did not.
All right, that's good.
All right, 1990s, my friend. So now you get into the 1990s. Wrestling starts to fall apart in all around.
Yeah.
Right? Early 90s,
Yeah,
wrestling gets
by
really slow.
1995, it's really starting to smell really bad. Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, well, the 90s was like we're saying, was a little bit of a lull until we got towards the Attitude Era and things started to explode again. But in the early 90s, of course, you still had the Rockers and LOD was there, and the Steiners came for. You can't call it a cup of coffee, can you? The Steiners weren't there for a cup of coffee.
No, they weren't. They were here for a
They
while.
were you're right. They actually had a full course meal, I guess. My impressions of the early 90s with tag team wrestling seemed to fade away as I was fading away from. They were losing me with the Sergeant Slaughter Hogan program. They were starting to lose me already. So it's a little vague, but it really comes into clarity for me in the later 90s when you're talking about the Dudleys and Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys and the New Age Outlaws and all these teams start to pop up, and then you had a huge scene going on. So the 90s was really a strange time anyway for wrestling. Wrestling took a dip and then had a huge comeback, and it almost reflects in the belts themselves. So that's my take on that. What do you want now? Maybe the greatest 3 teams of the 90s?
Well, I'm going to kind of throw that off here a little bit. I'm going to
All
ask
right.
you this question.
Okay.
Of all the tag team titles, the actual belts,
Yeah.
which were your favorites?
The physical belts
The
themselves?
physical belt,
Oh my
the
God.
look.
I'm the last guy that goes looking at toy belts to begin with. I never thought of that. I guess the one that stands out the most was the ones Guerrero and Martel and the Samoans wore back in the day.
Like the old style belts.
eagle
I'm
or
in a
whatever
little
it
bit of
was.
love with the circular belt, like kind of like the Intercontinental title.
I thought that the old 70s, late 70s, early 80s tag belts were great. That's my.
They have a
preference.
special feel to them, right?
They looked real. They didn't
Yes,
look like cheap
yes.
and plastic and cheesy. They looked like belts.
All right,
Yeah.
so we're
Okay.
running through the 90s. I'm going to give you some teams, and I want to hear what you think of probably the top 90s teams. And again, guys,
Yeah.
the top 90s, 80s, 70 teams may not make the top 10 list.
Right.
Shockingly
Dude,
enough.
This is not an easy thing to do.
Quebecers,
Sure.
1, 2, 3 Kid, and Marty Jannetty.
Okay. Yeah,
Men
I'm not
on a
doing-
Mission.
I'm not doing somersaults. What was that?
Men on a Mission.
Yeah,
Forgot about them,
I'm
right?
Not right. I'm not doing some. If you mention the ding dongs, I'm going to lose my shit. No ding dongs. Or was that WCW, the ding dongs?
Dudes with attitudes.
Yeah.
Michaels and Diesel.
Right.
So let me ask you this. So we were talking about the Mega Powers,
Yeah.
right? And Jimmy
have
and I
we,
would.
have we discussed the Mega
No,
Powers
when-
yet on the show?
No,
We've been
not on the
talking
show.
about it all week.
Right.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
for my top 10 list, I kept on saying, I don't know, man. I feel like I got to put the Mega Powers there.
it's
And
like,
Jimmy was
no.
getting crazy about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
were
Jimmy's
an
like,
event.
they didn't win the tag team
No,
titles.
were
They
an
don't
event.
deserve.
They were put together to be broken apart to have WrestleMania 5. That's what they were there for. I don't look at them as a tag team.
But-
I looked at them as something Vince did to go to the storyline. Like you told me, they were only together for 4 months. They had one major pay-per-view with the SummerSlam thing or whatever it was, and they were done because they were destined to have a fight and go, I hate you, Hulk Hogan. That's what was supposed to happen with that.
But wouldn't Shawn
on
Michaels-
paper, though, I grant you, Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage, you'd be really hard-pressed to get me a better team, okay?
Very hard
And
pressed.
those old schoolers, I can hear them now. Andre the Giant and Dusty Rhodes. You know what? They're not more marketable than Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage
Maria
on
Davis
the
says.
same team.
Maria Davis says the Can-Am connection. Another
Sure.
great team.
Absolutely nice call there, Maria
802, the Godwins.
Davis. Yeah, sure. I remember them. Absolutely.
Look, Stinger 110 says, guys, Mega Powers, come on. We're just talking about
We
that,
are.
bro. Look, he's saying Mega
But
Powers.
again,
Maybe
like I
Monty
said,
does know what he's talking about.
They're not a tag team. They were a tag team put together for a program that came to its end and was only 4 months, and it was one SummerSlam pay-per-view. That's it. That's
So let
it.
me ask you this. Do you
That's-
think
it's
two
not-
dudes with attitudes...
It's disrespectful to do that to the Samoans and the
How about-
Valiants and the teams that were together for decades. No.
How about
Go
two
on.
dudes with attitudes? They were put together to break up, but they won the tag team titles twice.
Attitudes. I barely go on.
How could you can't how could you not take that seriously?
Two
Seriously.
dudes with attitude. They're
Absolutely.
not at the top of my list. What can I tell you?
I'm just saying, you know what I
Okay.
mean? Here's
All right.
here's a team that you didn't give love to.
Well, who?
The Smoking Guns.
Oh,
They won the
well,
belts
I tell you
a
what,
million
when you got the list
times.
in front of you, you
No.
can give love to them. I don't do the Smoking Guns.
The
Yes, I
Smoking
remember the
Guns.
Smoking
They were a
Guns.
huge,
You know what
huge
I
tag
you know
team.
What I remember? I remember going for a box of Twinkies when the Smoking Guns were on. Go on.
But we're not
next.
talking about favorites. Remember that. We
Well,
said that.
talking
We're
about
not
the
talking
best.
about favorites.
That's why I went for Twinkies. They weren't one of the best. Next.
The Body Donnas in the
Yeah,
90s.
all right.
Right?
Yeah, okay.
Headbangers.
Yeah, okay.
All right?
Yeah.
New Age Outlaws.
There we go. There we go. That's one of the great all-time teams. Yet, and if you're not down with that, they've got 2 words for you. What, that wasn't over enough? They held the belts like 6 or 7 times or whatever it was.
802
They were-
Blues. Nice
you know.
one here. Too cool.
Oh, sure.
Singer says good point about the about the Mega Powers. It's a good point.
And I love the Mega Powers. Look again on.
But again,
paper,
all I'm saying, you
on
can't
paper,
you can't
the
waver
greatest
it.
pairing ever. I mean,
But you can't put two dudes with attitudes and say they don't matter.
I didn't say they don't matter.
You're like,
You're
"Ah."
saying they don't matter.
I'm saying they
You
matter.
know why I go because we're talking about who we'll get to. That's why I'm going okay? There's a list of these 10 teams that we had to come down to that are not You might love them or hate them, but they deserve
Well,
to be there.
we're going to get to that
You
right
know.
after this commercial break.
Hey, tag, you're in. That's right, folks. Canine Corral for all your dog daycare and overnight care. Call 631-549-1544. That's 631-549-1544.
Do you treat your dog as part of the family? Well, so do we. So why not celebrate your pup's birthday with the ultimate party box? Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Party Pup Info, and let us make your pup's party or any celebration perfection.
Elm Logistics. For all your logistic needs, call 631-299-3595. That's 631-299-3595. Elm Global Logistics. Pride, performance, and partnerships.
All right, welcome back to Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast. Monty and Pharaoh, only seen here out of Indie Music TV. So again, I'm gonna start with my list, which is pretty much the same as your list. A couple of things have shuffled here.
Yeah.
But again,
This was hard.
This
is really hard.
If it was my personal list.
It's not our personal lists.
But if it was my personal
Right.
list, the Mega Powers would be in the top 10.
Sure, I understand.
For sure.
I got you.
Rick Howard, Steiner Brothers are the best team of all time. Again,
This is
WWE,
Right.
WWF list.
Right, and the Steiners would be in the greatest all-time top 10, especially for the work they did everywhere else. This is strictly Vince's company.
And there are questionable picks here that I really struggled with.
Yeah.
So
wasn't easy.
My number 10 was the Hardy Boys.
Okay. Tell me why you put them at number 10.
The reason I took the Hardy Boys at number 10 is they were high flyers, tag team specialists for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I always felt that when the Hardy Boys wrestled anybody
Mm-hmm.
but Edge and Christian or the Dudley Boys,
Mm-hmm.
there was nothing special there.
Interesting.
I just never.
But you're still acknowledging them.
I have to acknowledge them because
Okay.
you know what? They were tag team innovators.
Absolutely. They were
Right?
great.
They were tag team innovators.
I will
so
talk more about them if they pop up on my list, but I respect that, and I do believe they deserve a spot on the list. So that's a good job by you. My number 10, and this was one where I almost kept them off completely because I do resent the push that they've gotten because I'm a Demolition fan, and I resent the push that Vince McMahon gave them to purposely pass Demolition's reign because of the lawsuit that Demolition's been involved with on and off against Vince. So I'm going to obviously say at number 10, and I have to acknowledge it because it's wrong to not acknowledge it. They hold the record for the longest reign in 50 years of the tag titles. I'm talking about the New Day. To me, they are a faction, but this is what I was getting back to earlier, that Vince forced them into the equation. I have to acknowledge them. They were champions forever. They were champions longer than Demolition. They broke the 400 and whatever days it was, and they're the longest reigning champions now. They also, to be fair, along with the Usos, are the face of the tag team division for the last half a decade. So they have the longest reign, and they've been the face of the tag team division for many years now, and they deserve some respect. So even though I am not a fan, and I do believe Vince purposely had them break Demolition's record for whatever he's holding against the Axe and Smash, the New Day is number 10.
So it's different times.
Yeah, and I have
All right,
to, I have
it's
to recognize
different
that, too.
times. It's about selling merchandise.
Oh, they sell a ton.
Right?
You know, a ton.
I agree with you. I had a problem with the New Day also, but I put them at number 9.
Okay. So you're in the ballpark.
Your number 9.
My number 9 is the New Age Outlaws. I believe that they were pretty much the face of the tag team division as far as the markability. They weren't necessarily the best wrestlers of the bunch that came out of the Attitude Era's tag team division, but they were the ones that were everyone had a DX Suck It shirt. Everyone. I had it. I know I had it. And I know everybody just loved to go, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, D-Generation X, probably brings to you the, whatever, how many times it was, tag team champions of the world. Those guys were so freaking over. They were so over, and they held the belts like 6 times. They're to me, the marketable face of that entire era. So I do believe they deserve a spot on this list. They are the New Age Outlaws. You don't have to like them. You don't have to think that they can wrestle like other people or whatever. This was a great tag team. And
Next up, we both had the Bulldogs at number 8.
The British Bulldogs.
Personally,
Now, you and I were going a little nuts.
Well,
with it. It's funny that we wind up having them at the same spot, considering how much we argued
so,
on this.
but here's the thing. I think we argued on different ends.
Okay.
If you really look at the British Bulldogs in their tag team back of the baseball card,
Right.
they held the belts for a very short time.
Okay.
They were a very small part of that tag team division.
They were a big part, but they didn't hold the belts
Well,
as much as they probably should have.
Well, what I mean is, as a tag team, they were a very small part. What puts them in the top 10 is their influence on the industry
God.
and their style.
Absolutely.
Becoming I believe the first face tag team that Captain Lou Albano managed. Obviously Dynamite Kid was hurt. That contributed to the issue. But I literally almost left them off the list. But
I couldn't do that.
it was very difficult.
Yeah.
It was hard for me not to put them on, not to put them on the list and to take them off the list.
Right.
So I said, you know what? I can't not recognize what they have done for the industry.
Absolutely, and to this day, they're still so respected and revered. It's just, I feel that they had to have a place in there regardless. Some people would be, "What are you, crazy? They're the best," and I could see why you would think that. I mean, in the ring, technically, but that's not completely what this is about at all. If it was a technical contest, of course, they're probably in the top 3. Who do we have at number 7, Mike?
So at number 7, I put Edge and Christian.
Interesting. That's what I have as well.
Exactly. Again, going back to the Intercontinental deal that we did, Edge to me is more of a singles guy.
Yeah.
So we said, hey, this guy was
champion.
a great Intercontinental champion, but when I think of Edge now, I think of him as world champion.
World champion.
Christian, I think is Christian.
Tag team champion with Edge.
Exactly.
That's what I think of to this day, even though Christian's had his world titles and stuff, but I never got there with Christian. I did with Edge.
And I almost feel like Edge and Christian, the same I said about the Hardys, right? They were great with the Dudleys.
Right.
They were great with the Hardys.
Right, but
and
you
after
don't
that,
remember anything distinctive
nothing.
otherwise. But you know what, though? You can't take that away from them. This was the magic of those 3 teams. And they deserve to be given all the credit in the world, and that's why they're on this list. So, okay, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Exactly. Who's at number 6?
Number 6, this is where we have a disparaging difference between ourselves, but
Right.
the Dudley Boys are my number 6.
I can't argue with them being on your list. Why do you place them there? Tell me how did they make your list in the first place?
Well, again, I think of the 3 teams that they're recognized with, the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian. The Dudley Boys are the best of those teams, and the Dudleys actually had other great matches in the WWE, WWF with other teams, which I felt the other 2 didn't.
Right.
So but then again, I could not put them higher than I put them.
Right.
And again, I could understand arguing the point, because if you really look at just overall tag team success,
Right. Dudleys.
the Dudleys are probably, you'd be hard to argue that they were the greatest tag team.
Oh, God, I love the Dudleys. To me are the Hanson brothers. From Slapshot. I
Sure.
mean, they're just in a wrestling ring. I love the Dudley Boys. Always have.
But your number 6.
My number 6 is the Hart Foundation. And it's funny. You were sitting here mentioning about how you look at Edge, you think world champion. Look at the Hart Foundation. You got Bret Hart. He's still a world champion. You know what I mean? But there he is, as he should be. The Hart Foundation, forget it. They were absolutely great. I considered them more impactful than the British Bulldogs at the time. They were more over. I'll tell you that. That much I do remember. I thought that they were amazing, and boy, did they complement each other. They really did. You had the ultimate technician, the silent but deadly Bret Hart, and the beast, Neidhart, the loose cannon.
And I mean, don't hold
They
me
were
to it.
so
I'd have
great
to look it
together.
up. They were together for a very long
They were.
time,
They
and they
were
were,
great.
and
Truly great.
they were really,
They really were. They were great. I don't have them as high as you do, and we'll get to yours in a little bit. But you obviously have very high regard for the Hart Foundation. That's for shit sure. How about at number 5? Where do we go? Who do you got?
Okay, so I have.
Oh,
sorry, I was
look at
just
this.
messaging some of the people.
If I'm not mistaken.
Number 5, the New Age Outlaws. So this is where I totally disagreed with your list. I felt you did not give them enough
Really?
credit. They were.
I thought I did.
They were they're low on your list, right? They're 9.
Yeah, but they're on my list.
Oh yeah, of
There's
course.
50 years here with 5,000 teams, and they're in the top 10. Oy.
I felt that they were the team
They were.
in the hottest time
were.
of professional wrestling.
I agree.
And
But they had a lot of help.
Absolutely.
And that's where I don't, and the ones who were helping, I think, were superior. And that's, some of them, or at least one of them.
That's a great
But
point.
we'll get to that.
That's a great point. Now,
We will get to that.
you had, what did you have at number 5?
At number 5, I have the Hardy Boys because, again, this gets back to the Hardy Boys, to me, really represent a tag team. And yes, Jeff went on to be world champion and all this other stuff, but the Hardy Boys are, to me, a quintessential idea of a tag team. First of all, they're bros, okay? And that never hurts, that they're bros. Second of all, their ability in the ring is insane, and that always helps, too. But the thing that I always loved the most about them is that although they went their separate ways sometimes, and although they had some individual successes, Matt had some success, too. When they came back together at WrestleMania recently, when Vince brought them back, the house caved in. That was the affirmation of what I've always known. The Hardy Boys are legends. They're legends. And they didn't start out that way with me. When they started out those two skinny kids in plaid that were getting ragged all over the place. Do you remember their early days? How ragdoll that they used to get?
Absolutely.
They really turned into a fine wine. And I'm not even a fan of the Hardy Boys, but I understand.
Well, I could tell you,
are.
I'm not a fan of a lot of these teams.
That's true, too. That's
Like I said
true,
last
too.
week when we had the head-to-head with Warrior and Sting.
Right.
I was more of a Sting fan than I was a Warrior fan.
Right.
But personally, I felt, what I felt. You know what I mean?
Sure. It's not easy. Who's
Number
at number
4,
4?
I had the Wild Samoans.
Interesting. So do I. That's where I put the Samoans.
I think you can't. It's hard to argue that point.
Come on.
Were they the greatest wrestlers? No.
They didn't have to be.
Were they great on the mic? No.
They didn't have to talk.
Exactly.
They were just brutish. They just kill you. I thought that they were great. Every headbutt you see today either comes from Andre or the Samoans. Yeah. It's all there is to it. No,
There's so many
Samoans were
great comments going on right now.
Yeah.
People
It's
are
not easy.
people are
Sorry,
mentioning,
guys.
Killer Bees.
Sure. Sure, of course you can mention them. But listen to these names we're dropping in the
the
top
Beverly Brothers. But it's like such a great memory, though. These were great teams.
What, not one DOA mention? I'm offended for motorcyclists.
There was not a DOA mention.
What's going on here?
I'm glad you put them up. I forgot about
why
that.
not?
You know what the
Might
problem
as
with the
well.
tag team division? So many teams you can't remember them.
Right. Right.
Stinger 10, thank you for the monthly membership, buddy. I really appreciate that. Thanks for coming on board on Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast. I want to remind everybody after this show, we have a very rare interview with Chief Jules Strongbow.
Wow.
Going to be fun.
On the subject of tag team wrestling. Nice.
The Valiants I have is number 3.
So do I. That's interesting. Yeah, the Valiants to me are the greatest team of the 70s. They were the first one with the longest reign. Demolition broke their record.
Even Luscious Johnny?
I can't really blame him for who he was friends with.
You're right.
Be nice, but he was.
Do you think he was really friends with that guy anyway?
Highly unlikely.
He probably was like, I hate this guy as much as we do.
Yeah.
The Valiants to me, I've told this story.
Yeah.
I was younger, much younger.
And great.
It's midnight, WOR. And me and my sister are running through the channels. My sister's, I think, 4 years
What are you,
older than
like
me.
11 back then?
Shit, I don't even remember, man.
Yeah,
But
if it's the late 70s, you probably
all I
11.
remember is you see these guys, and they have blonde hair, but I think they're women with no shirts on.
You thought they were girls.
Right? I'm like, what is this?
You thought they were girls.
And
The
me and my
Valiants.
sister are like, what is going on here? And then my father comes out and he goes, that's pro wrestling. And I'm like, what is that?
Yeah, what am I looking at?
What am I looking at?
Right.
And
Blonde-haired girls with no shirts on. That's what you thought you were looking at.
what were your memories?
It's a hell of a first impression.
What were your
Mike.
memories of the Valiants?
Well, the Valiants, I had heard from my neighbor's dad, who was talking to my dad in the barbecue background of 1978. The Yankees were on their way to a second world title. The Bee Gees were playing I remember everything.
Yeah.
And he brought up pro wrestling, and my father started talking about the Gorgeous George days, and he dropped the Valiants. He goes, "Have you seen the Valiants?" And my father was like, "No, who's that?" He goes, "Oh, these crazy guys. They're like long blonde-haired, like rebel kind of guys. They're bad guys. They're great." And my little friend who I hung out with at the time, he turns to me, he goes, "I love the Valiants, and George Steele too. He's got a green tongue." I was like, these were my first impressions. I saw the Valiants over at his house because he had.
Let me ask you this. So a lot of times when you were tag team champion back then,
Yeah.
You had also, major singles matches. Like,
Sure.
remember the Samoans used to wrestle Backlund at the Garden?
Both got a shot
You know
at
what I mean?
bat.
Did the-
Fuji got a shot.
So let me ask you this. Did the
Backlund.
Valiants get shots at San Martino?
Most likely, I would think so.
Okay. I didn't know if you had remembered that.
I
or-
don't remember, but I'm pretty sure Johnny got a shot or two. Probably not from any help from his friends, but he probably got a shot.
All right, number 2 is very difficult for me because they are my favorite tag team of all time.
How dare you?
Demolition,
How
I put it number 2.
dare you? How
Th-
could
this
you?
I just
Interesting.
I
Okay, all right,
didn't
well,
have a choice.
You know what? Say nice things about the team we both love. Go ahead at number 2, Demolition, who we've had in studio and great
Demolition
guys.
were the perfect, and we had them in studio. Great people, like you said. Their music
Oh, God.
was killer.
Of course it was.
I remember when they first came out. I was in the military, and the
was
first
great.
thing, I saw an article. I was in Germany. Okay. And Demolition were debuted, and I'm sure I'm right about this, at the Meadowlands. It was a tag team tournament.
Okay.
And the winner got a tag team title.
All right.
And I remember there was a picture of Demolition, and I think it was Moondog King. Was it Moondog King?
Okay.
Of Rex was the other Demolition guy. I was like, what a joke. LOD ripoffs,
Right.
Road Warrior ripoffs.
Right.
But as things went on, they got their music, and boy, did I love Demolition. And so many great moments, being a heel team, turning face.
That was great, too.
Turning heel.
What about at the Rumble where they beat the hell out of each other?
I was going to say that.
It's one of the best moments
Wow.
ever.
And again, when Andre comes in and they just go back to normal, whew.
Do you know what I remember the most, though? The first time they were over, they came out, and it was at the Garden. I do remember this. And
Go ahead.
They came out, and the music was playing, and they turned and they looked at the crowd, and they took off the veils. You know how they had their faces covered?
Yeah.
They ripped them off, and there was the face paint. And, dude, the place went nuts.
Absolutely.
And they were like, ooh, when you saw them, it was just, they were so Road Warrior. You had to be back in that time period to fully grasp just how heavy metal and just how Road Warrior cool, I'm referring to Gibson's movies back in the 80s. That's how cool Demolition was. They were so freaking cool. And they were a great team. They had great chemistry. And they had the longest reign for decades and decades until Vince decided to put it on the new day.
Again, some other great names coming
just
out
to
here,
spite
guys.
them, in my opinion.
APA, Power and Glory. Again, Power and Glory didn't win the
was
belt. So
flipping great.
they were awesome.
Damn! They were great. I loved their backstage vignettes where they were drinking. Oh, my God. APA was excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
You know who's nobody's mentioning? I'm surprised. Anybody remember the Un-Americans?
The Un-Americans.
The Un-Americans were irritating as shit with Storm, Christian, and Test. They were irritating as shit.
It's amazing how great this tag team division
There's
is.
been a lot of great teams over
You
the
had the
years.
Dudley Boys at number 2.
Yes, I did.
Tell me why.
I would have put them at number 1, but I'll save my number 1 from when I shortly get there. The Dudley Boys, to me, are, as I said before, the Hansons from Slapshot, but they're also so much more than that. They have beautiful chemistry. They always did. They could have great matches, like you said, with multiple different teams.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what style, the Dudleys will do it. The Dudleys were legitimately tough. As they were coming up, they were tough teams that were testing them physically, and they were like, they'd go to the back and go, oh, crap, those guys give as good as they get.
Yeah.
The Dudley Boys, to me, are tag team wrestling just in general. And what a great gimmick. You guys looking at them at home? They're brothers? It's hilarious, the fact that they made, oh, he's my brother. This is my brother, Devon. It's just everything they did was great, and it was very Slapshot great.
It's funny how that goes because I remember when they first came, I always liked the stuttering, Bubba Ray Dudley.
That was great.
And, I did, but then he went
That
away
was
from it. I
great.
guess he didn't want to do it anymore.
Right.
And,
Well, he moved on to
802
other
says
things
the
before.
Orient Express, dude.
Sure, Pat
Pat
Tanaka's one of our
Tanaka
boys.
and
We
Paul
love Pat
Diamond,
Tanaka.
man. What a great
Absolutely.
team. All right, guys, we're at
Absolutely.
the end here. I'm giving my number 1. Farrell will give his number 1.
All right.
My number 1, again, not a fan of the team, but I don't think it's very hard to argue this. The Hart Foundation.
Interesting.
They
Interesting.
were innovative before innovation.
Okay.
They had their moves. They looked great together. They could wrestle with everyone. You had the power, and then you had the
Yeah.
artist
Yeah.
in Bret Hart. Jim Neidhart was the power.
Yep. Yeah,
They-
as far as balance goes on this list of our, and we have them both on our list, that is the most balanced team on the list.
Again, the problem is Bret Hart
finesse
became
guy, a power guy.
a great intercontinental champion, a great world champion. So,
Right.
but again, the Hart Foundation. Listen, I remember the Hart Foundation as much as I hated them when Demolition became again another faction. Mm-hmm. Okay,
Right.
they were a
Crush.
faction.
Yeah, that was right.
When
Right.
when they had that SummerSlam match at the end when Demolition was being phased out and LOD came out and helped the Hart Foundation win the belt, there was no way I thought the Hart Foundation was going to beat Demolition. I was like, they can't do this. I don't know, man. As shocking as it is to me, the Hart Foundation is the greatest WWE Tag Team
Interesting.
Champion.
Well, Ed Farrell's number one, and I'm sure it won't be a surprise to too many people. I have Demolition. There's a reason why that record stood for around 30 years. That record stood. Okay, it was their shoulders, whether it was merchandise back in those days or whether it was main event matches during the early days of WrestleMania. It was their shoulders that was placed upon, and boy, did they deliver. Okay, they also had to always deal with being in the shadow of the Road Warriors, but those of us who watched WWF back in those days, we knew exactly what they were.
Well, they were
nothing.
our Road
They
Warriors.
were
They
nothing,
were
but
our
they were
Road
nothing
Warriors.
like the Road Warriors. Nothing. They just happened to be two big dudes with face paint. Are we really that simple that we couldn't tell the awesome dynamic differences between, in my opinion, the two greatest teams of all time? So it's not like I'm discrediting the world. If the Road Warriors, if this had been a greatest team of all time list, I've got the Road Warriors at number one.
I'm going to disagree with you.
You got to be historically ignorant.
I'm going to disagree with you on that one point.
What's that?
There's no doubt that Demolition
There's no
was...
doubt Vince wanted to create something in that image.
Hold on. There's
got
no
that.
doubt he brought them in to make his own Road Warriors.
There's no doubt. Not
I
saying
think
that.
in his mind, that's what he wanted to do.
Right.
I don't even think Vince McMahon Jr., as great and brilliant as he is,
Realized
realized that Demolition
would work that way.
will end up becoming what they became.
Right.
So yes,
Right.
they, when we had Demolition here, they said we didn't even. No, you knew what you were doing. You knew what you were being brought in for.
Right.
I totally disagreed with them. I thought they weren't telling the truth.
But they weren't trying to imitate them. They didn't wrestle like them at all. They didn't.
I
behave like them.
think is what they
behaved
wanted
like
to
them.
become the WWE's Road Warriors, but
Right.
it grew legs on its own.
It sure did.
And you're right.
It
They
sure did.
didn't wrestle like LOD.
No.
It was a totally different
They had a
animal.
different vibe.
But
quite honestly,
I don't want to, I don't want to, insult,
don't forget, you have them at number
fans'
2,
intelligence.
So it's not like
I'm a huge Demolition guy. You know that.
Absolutely.
But again,
you know what? It's not about insulting fans' intelligence when you bring up the Road Warriors to me. Everybody knew that they were supposed to be like a Road Warriors. I'm pointing out the thing that no one ever says or has the balls to say. They were completely different. And they were completely different. And when I watched them, I didn't get the same feel I got as watching the Road Warriors. They had their own distinctive, awesome it factor, and they were great. And that's why they held the belt for that long. And
Again,
that's why the record stood for decades and decades and decades.
Again, that's why it didn't take off well in the beginning, because they were Road Warrior knockoffs that grew into their own.
Right.
So yes, you're 100% right.
I love
but
them
let's
right away.
let's not turn around and say that they weren't Road Warrior knockoffs.
Who's saying that?
I'm just saying, they didn't start off going, hey, this isn't the Road Warriors.
Right.
This is the Road Warriors. And then it
Right.
became, hey, guess what? This is Demolition.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right? This is now
No kidding.
Demolition.
And someone should cut a check to Rick Derringer, whoever it was, whether it was JJ, whoever it was that came up with the freaking riff for that.
JJ
It
McGuire,
was
friend
JJ.
of the show.
Somebody could have checked to JJ,
All right, with that, you've been watching Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast, Monty and the Pharaoh, only seen here at Indie Music TV. We'll be on next in a very rare interview with WWE legend Chief Jay Strongbow in, I think, about 20 minutes. We're looking forward to that. Pharaoh, any final words on the show?
Well, folks, as you're probably pulling out your hair, some of you, because we didn't mention your favorite team, just understand that this was a seriously hard thing to do. I hope you enjoyed it. We had to comb over 50 years of all the all-time greats, but I think we were historically responsible at the end of the day. So it is what it is.
Gregory Krug says out there he liked Bill Eadie better as a Masked Superstar. Bro, I loved Masked Superstar
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
That was tough for me too. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
look, like you said, it's very tough. You have people, teams, or wrestlers that are your favorites.
Sure.
But if you want to be, like
Objective.
you said, objective
Yeah.
and responsible, I believe this is a responsible list.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same list. It's just
Yeah.
like, where
Just
did you
wanted
put
to-
the
yeah,
square
just-
peg in the square hole
Right.
or whatever? You know what I mean?
And it's not surprising we came up with basically the same teams. These are the great teams.
All right, well, we're looking forward to everybody joining us in about 20 minutes. This is Mike Monty.
This is the Pharaoh, and until a couple of seconds from now, later.